34% commission to translate this, the billionaire said. The maid's black daughter stunned him. The room froze. 12 executives turned to stare at the young black woman in thrift store clothes who had just spoken to Richard Lawson like an equal. But Maya wasn't looking at them. She was looking directly into the billionaire's ice-blue eyes, watching them shift from irritation to curiosity to something else entirely. Have you ever been the smartest person in a room where no one expected you to speak? Has anyone ever underestimated you because of who your parents were? Hi, viewers. Welcome to American Stories, where love conquers impossible odds and dreams refuse to die. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or told you don't belong somewhere, this story is for you. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe talent can shine brighter than privilege, and let me know what barrier you've had to break through in your own life. Your story matters here. 34% commission to translate this, the billionaire demanded, sliding the folder across mahogany. The one who picked it up wasn't an executive. It was the maid's daughter who would save his empire and destroy his walls. The Houston skyline stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, oil derricks, and glass towers competing for dominance. In a mahogany-paneled boardroom, silence stretched taut as violin strings while executives in $1,000 suits waited for someone brave enough to touch the untouchable Richard Lawson's mistake. But Maya Rodriguez wasn't thinking about untouchable billionaires or mistakes. She was thinking about her mother, Gloria, who had brought her along today because their car was in the shop and Maya needed to catch the bus to her evening job at the library. She was thinking about the contracts spread across the conference table, written in Spanish and English, with legal terms that made grown men in expensive suits shift nervously in their chairs. Richard Lawson commanded the room like a general surveying a battlefield. His steel-gray eyes swept across 12 board members, each one representing millions in investment capital, none brave enough to admit they couldn't read the international oil merger documents that would make or break his empire. Well, his voice cut through the tension like a blade. I'm paying consultants a fortune to handle a simple translation. Someone read this contract before I sign away 34% of my company. Maya's eyes caught on a phrase that made her stomach drop. The Spanish section didn't match the English translation. Not even close. While executives fidgeted with their phones and avoided eye contact, she found herself standing, moving toward the table before her mind caught up with her body. "Sir," she said softly but firmly, her voice carrying across the silent boardroom. "This translation is wrong. If you sign it, you'll lose everything." The room froze. 12 executives turned to stare at the young black woman in thrift store clothes who had just spoken to Richard Lawson like an equal. But Maya wasn't looking at them. She was looking directly into the billionaire's ice-blue eyes, watching them shift from irritation to curiosity to something else entirely. Richard leaned forward slowly, his attention focused completely on her for the first time. "Who are you?" "Maya Rodriguez," she replied, her chin lifting with quiet defiance. "I'm Gloria's daughter." The shock rippled through the room like an earthquake. Gloria, the woman who cleaned their offices, who was invisible until someone needed fresh coffee or emptied trash cans. Her daughter was correcting a room full of Harvard MBAs on international contract law. "Show me," Richard said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that made senators nervous and competitors sweat. Maya approached the table, aware of every eye tracking her movement. Her fingers traced the Spanish text while she spoke. "The English version says you're giving them 34% commission on future deals. But the Spanish section grants them 34% ownership of your entire company, effective immediately upon signing. They're not hiring you as a consultant. They're buying you out for pennies on the dollar." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face went through several expressions: shock, fury, calculation, before settling into something Maya couldn't read. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "Everyone out. Now." Chairs scraped against marble floors as 12 executives filed out like scolded children, whispering among themselves, stealing glances back at the maid's daughter who had just saved their boss from losing his billion-dollar empire. But Maya didn't move. She stood beside the conference table, contract still in her hands, heart pounding against her ribs as Richard Lawson studied her with the intensity of a man who had just discovered something rare and valuable. Have you ever been the smartest person in a room where no one expected you to speak? Has anyone ever underestimated you because of who your parents were? Maya was about to prove that intelligence doesn't respect bloodlines or bank accounts. But what happens when brilliance threatens the very foundation of power? Stay, he said simply, and that single word changed everything. As the boardroom door clicked shut behind the last executive, Richard's mask of corporate control slipped just enough for Maya to glimpse the man beneath the billionaire. He was looking at her like she had just performed magic, like she had reached into his world and rearranged everything he thought he knew about power and worth, and who deserved to sit at tables like this one. The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and danger in equal measure. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She had just saved his billion-dollar deal, but something in his eyes suggested the real negotiation was just beginning. For 37 years, no one had surprised Richard Lawson. Then a 19-year-old in second-hand clothes made him question everything he thought he knew about power. His private office occupied an entire corner of the 52nd floor, leather and steel arranged with military precision. But Maya didn't shrink in the space designed to intimidate. She claimed the chair across from his desk, like she belonged there. Richard had built his empire by reading people faster than they could lie to him. Politicians, oil executives, tech moguls, they all had Tell's weaknesses he could exploit. But Maya Rodriguez sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, waiting for him to speak first. The girl who cleaned offices after school had better negotiation instincts than most of his board members. "You read that contract like you've been negotiating oil deals your whole life," he said, voice dropping lower than necessary. "Where did you learn to do that?" Her chin lifted with defiance that made something unexpected tighten in his chest. "The library doesn't check your bank account, Mr. Lawson." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. High cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, lips that hadn't learned to lie yet. She was beautiful, but that wasn't what held his attention. Beautiful women threw themselves at him regularly. This was different. This was a mind that could keep pace with his own. "What else do you know?" The question came out rougher than intended. "Spanish, English, basic French. Contract law, corporate structure, international trade agreements." She paused, then added with the ghost of a smile, "And that your legal team is overpaid and underqualified." A laugh escaped him. Actual laughter, not the polished chuckle he used in board meetings. When was the last time someone had made him genuinely laugh? "My mother's going to be worried," Maya said, glancing toward the door. "She'll think I'm in trouble." "Are you?" Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with business contracts and everything to do with the way her pulse visibly fluttered at her throat when he looked at her like that. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "Am I?" Before he could answer, his office door opened. Gloria Rodriguez stood in the doorway, cleaning supplies clutched in her hands, eyes wide with terror at seeing her daughter alone with the most powerful man in the building. "Maya," Gloria's voice shook. "What are you doing here?" Richard watched Maya's posture change instantly. The confident negotiator replaced by a protective daughter. "It's okay, Mama. Mr. Lawson just had some questions about the contract." But Gloria's eyes were fixed on Richard, recognition and fear warring in her expression. She knew exactly what it meant when powerful white men paid special attention to young black women. History had taught her that lesson in the cruelest ways possible. "Mr. Lawson," Gloria's voice carried decades of practiced deference. "Maya needs to get her job at the library. She can't be late." Richard stood slowly, his movement drawing both women's attention. He walked to his desk, pulled out his business card holder, and selected a card with deliberate precision. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying the authority that moved markets and toppled governments, "Maya won't need that job anymore." He slid a business card across the desk, Maya's name already printed in elegant script. Maya Rodriguez, legal consultant. Maya stared at the card, then up at him. I had this made while you were reading the contract, he said quietly. Before you saved me from losing everything. Gloria's cleaning supplies clattered to the floor. Maya reached for the card with trembling fingers, her name printed in letters that somehow made her real in a way she'd never been before. When was the last time someone saw your potential before you believed in it yourself? Share that moment in the comments. Sir, Maya's voice came out barely above a whisper. I don't understand. You saved my company. You're 19 years old with no formal training, and you spotted a trap that 12 MBAs with law degrees missed completely. He leaned forward, his attention focused entirely on her. I don't understand it either, but I want to. When she looked up from the card, something had changed in his expression. The corporate mask had slipped completely, revealing a man who was looking at her not like an employee or a curiosity, but like someone he was seeing for the first time. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks under his intense scrutiny. She had been invisible her entire life. The maid's daughter, the scholarship student, the girl who worked 3 jobs and still got treated like she didn't belong anywhere. But under Richard Lawson's gaze, she felt exposed, seen, recognized in ways that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. What exactly are you offering? She managed to ask. His answer would change everything. A chance to be exactly as brilliant as you already are. She accepted a job translating contracts. What she didn't expect was how the billionaire would start translating her. Every glance, every word, every breath she took in his presence. The executive floor buzzed with whispered conversations that died when she passed, expensive suits parting like curtains to reveal the curiosity and skepticism beneath. But in Richard's presence, the whispers fell silent, his authority creating a protective bubble she hadn't asked for but couldn't deny needing. Maya's first week as legal consultant felt like learning to breathe underwater. The corporate world had its own language, its own rules, its own way of making outsiders feel like imposters. But every time doubt crept in, she would catch Richard watching her with that intense focus that made her pulse skip, and she would remember. He chose her because her mind was sharp enough to save his empire. The Morrison deal, he said, sliding another contract across her new desk. Real mahogany, positioned strategically where he could see her from his office. What do you think? Maya scanned the pages, her trained eyes catching inconsistencies that would have cost millions. They're trying to slip in a clause about mineral rights that wasn't in the original negotiation. Page 12, paragraph 4. Catch it, he said simply, and she felt pride warm her chest like sunlight. But it wasn't just the work that kept her off balance. It was the way Richard's hand would brush hers when he handed her documents. The way he would stand just close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and clean that made her think of crisp sheets and late nights. The way his voice would drop lower when they were alone, like he was sharing secrets meant only for her. The other executives treated her with polite confusion. She was too young, too black, too female, too everything they weren't used to seeing in their world. But Richard's protection was absolute. When someone questioned her presence in a meeting, his ice blue stare would silence them before Maya even had to defend herself. You don't have to fight my battles, she told him one evening as they worked late, city lights painting patterns across the conference table. I'm not fighting your battles, he replied, looking up from his laptop. I'm making sure you get the chance to fight them yourself. Their eyes met across the table, and Maya felt that familiar flutter of heat low in her stomach. Working with Richard Lawson was like dancing on the edge of a cliff, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. The office Christmas party arrived faster than Maya expected. She stood in her bedroom, staring at the dress Gloria had helped her pick out. Simple black, elegant enough for corporate events, but affordable enough for their budget. It would have to do. But when she walked into the party, conversations didn't just pause. They stopped completely. Maya felt every eye in the room tracking her movement, executives and their wives assessing her like a puzzle they couldn't solve. She made it exactly 3 minutes before the loneliness hit. These people shared histories she wasn't part of, references she didn't understand, casual mentions of vacations that cost more than her family's yearly rent. Maya found herself backing toward the exit, ready to disappear before anyone noticed she didn't belong. Then Richard appeared beside her, his hand settling at the small of her back with possessive certainty that sent shock waves through the room. Leaving already? His voice carried just enough warmth to let everyone listening know exactly where his attention was focused. I don't really fit here, Maya admitted quietly. His hand pressed more firmly against her back, anchoring her to the spot. You fit anywhere your mind can contribute something valuable. And your mind is the most valuable thing in this room. Have you ever been the outsider in a room full of insiders? How did you prove you belonged? Drop your story below. The possessive gesture wasn't lost on anyone watching. Richard Lawson, who had never brought a date to company functions, who treated women with polite distance, was publicly claiming the maid's daughter as someone under his protection. Maya felt heat spread through her body from the point where his hand touched her back. This wasn't just professional mentorship anymore. This was something else entirely, something that made her breath catch and her skin warm despite the December chill from the windows. Stay, he murmured, close enough that his breath stirred the hair near her ear. Let them get used to seeing you where you belong. As rain began pelting the windows during their third late-night work session that week, Maya looked up from the contracts to find Richard watching her with an intensity that made her pulse skip. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up, the corporate armor set aside to reveal the man underneath. What? She asked, suddenly aware of how alone they were on the 52nd floor. His answer came barely above a whisper, rough with something she was afraid to name. I'm trying to figure out why I've never noticed how beautiful intelligence looks. The confession hung between them, like lightning waiting to strike. Maya's pen stilled in her hand as she stared across the table at the most powerful man in Texas, who was looking at her like she held secrets he desperately wanted to learn. Thunder crashed outside, and in that moment of sound and fury, Maya realized they had crossed a line neither of them could uncross. The billionaire and the maid's daughter were no longer just employer and employee. They were something far more dangerous. The moment a billionaire stops seeing you as an employee and starts seeing you as a woman, everything becomes dangerous, especially your own heart. Dallas glittered below them like scattered coins on black velvet as midnight approached. His office, usually a fortress of control, had transformed into something intimate. Jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, walls down for the first time in years. Maya tried to focus on the merger document spread between them, but Richard's confession hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Every casual brush of his fingers against hers when he passed her papers felt deliberate now. Every time he leaned close to point out a clause, she caught herself breathing in his scent, memorizing the sound of his voice when it dropped to that intimate register meant only for her. The Petrov deal has the same problem, she said, forcing her attention back to the contracts. They're banking on you not reading the fine print in Russian. You read Russian now? The question came with that half-smile that made her stomach flip. Basic legal terms. Enough to know they're trying to screw you. She looked up to find him staring at her with undisguised admiration that made heat pool low in her belly. Maya, he said her name like a prayer, and she knew they were about to cross another line. He stood slowly, moving around the table with predatory grace until he was close enough to touch. Maya's breath caught as his fingers traced her jawline, thumb brushing across her lower lip with reverent precision. Tell me to stop, he whispered, but his eyes were asking her to do the opposite. Instead of answering with words, Maya rose from her chair, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His hands framed her face as the city lights painted patterns across their skin. When his mouth finally claimed hers, it was with the controlled desperation of a man who had been holding back for weeks. Maya melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as he backed her against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Dallas. This is insane, he murmured against her lips, but his hands were already tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. Completely, she breathed back, but neither of them pulled away. His thumb traced her jawline as the city lights painted patterns across their faces, his touch asking permission for everything he wanted to take. When he lifted her onto his desk, scattering contracts to the floor, Maya realized they were both crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate and completely inevitable. His hands mapped the curve of her waist, her back, learning the shape of her like she was geography he needed to memorize. Maya had never been touched like this, like she was precious and powerful at the same time. "Is this okay?" He whispered against her neck, and the fact that he asked, that he made sure she wanted this as much as he did, made her heart crack open in ways she hadn't expected. "Yes," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. His mouth found hers again, and Maya understood for the first time why people wrote songs about moments like this. Richard Lawson kissed her like she was air and he had been drowning, like she was sunlight and he had been living in darkness for years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know the rules for this," he admitted, vulnerability making his voice rough. "Neither do I," she whispered back. "Maybe we write our own." What would you do if someone who controlled your future also controlled your heartbeat? Tell me in the comments if you've ever been caught between your head and your heart. The elevator doors opened just as they broke apart. Gloria stood frozen in the hallway, cleaning supplies scattered at her feet, her face a mask of terror and betrayal that cut through Maya's euphoria like ice water. "Maya," she whispered, her voice carrying decades of pain and fear. "What have you done?" The spell shattered. Maya slid down from the desk, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands while Richard stepped protectively in front of her. But the damage was done. Gloria had seen her daughter in the arms of the most powerful man in the building, and history had taught her exactly how stories like this ended. "Mama," Maya started, but Gloria was already backing toward the elevator. "Get your things." Gloria's voice shook with controlled panic. "We're going home, Mrs. Rodriguez." Richard's voice carried all his corporate authority, but Gloria didn't flinch. "No," she said simply. "You don't get to do this. Not to my daughter." The elevator doors closed on Gloria's terrified face, leaving Maya and Richard alone with the wreckage of whatever they had been building. In the space of 30 seconds, their private world had been invaded by the harsh reality of what their relationship looked like from the outside. A powerful white billionaire and a 19-year-old black woman whose mother cleaned his offices. Maya sank in her chair, the weight of her mother's fear crushing the joy she had felt moments before. Richard reached for her, but she pulled away, the spell completely broken. "She's right to be scared," Maya said quietly. "Isn't she?" Richard's silence was answer enough. A mother who had sacrificed everything to protect her daughter watched her walking straight into the kind of fire that destroys girls like them. Wealthy, powerful, and white. The small apartment in East Dallas felt even tinier with tension filling every corner. Gloria paced between the kitchen and living room like a caged animal, while Maya sat rigid on the second-hand couch. Both women trapped by histories they couldn't escape. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Gloria's voice cracked with years of suppressed pain. "Do you understand what men like him do to girls like us?" Maya's body still remembered Richard's touch, the way his hands had mapped her like she was territory worth claiming. But under her mother's devastated gaze, those memories felt dangerous, foolish, naive. "It's not what you think," Maya said quietly. "It's exactly what I think." Gloria stopped pacing, her eyes blazing with protective fury. "You think because he kissed you that he sees you as equal? Baby, men like him don't marry girls like us. They use us up and throw us away when they're done playing. He's not playing. He's a billionaire, Maya. A white billionaire who could have any woman in the world. What makes you think you're special?" The words hit like physical blows. Maya felt her carefully constructed confidence crumble under the weight of her mother's fear. Because Gloria was right, wasn't she? What made Maya Rodriguez special enough to hold the attention of a man who moved markets and toppled governments? "You saw how he looks at me," Maya said, hating how uncertain her voice sounded. "I saw how he looks at what he wants to take from you." Gloria sank onto the couch beside her daughter, exhaustion replacing anger. "Baby, listen to me. I was your age when I met your father. He was older, successful, charming. He made me feel special too. Maya had heard fragments of this story before, but never the whole truth. Daddy was different. Your father was married. The words fell like stones into still water. He had a wife and 2 sons in Atlanta. I was just the young, stupid girl who believed his promises about leaving them for me. The apartment fell silent except for the sound of Gloria's ragged breathing. Maya stared at her mother, seeing her father's abandonment through different eyes for the first time. He used me for 3 years, Gloria continued, her voice hollow with old pain. Promised me everything, gave me nothing but you. And when his wife found out, when his reputation was on the line, guess who disappeared? Guess who never existed? Maya felt nauseous. Richard isn't daddy. All powerful men are the same when their reputation is threatened. Gloria took her daughter's hands, her grip desperate. They protect what matters to them, and girls like us never matter enough. Maybe I'm not you, Mama. The words came out harder than Maya intended. Maybe I'm not willing to stay invisible forever. Gloria flinched like she'd been slapped. Invisible kept us alive. Invisible kept food on the table and a roof over our heads. Visible gets us destroyed. The knock on their door at midnight changed everything. Maya's heart stopped as she peered through the peephole to see Richard standing in the hallway, rain-soaked and desperate, holding a folder that would either prove Gloria's worst fears right or show that some men really do see beyond the barriers the world builds between them. Don't answer it, Gloria whispered, but Maya was already turning the locks. Richard stood, dripping in their doorway, his expensive suit ruined by the storm, his hair disheveled, looking more human than Maya had ever seen him. His eyes found hers immediately, searching her face like he was looking for forgiveness. I'm sorry, he said simply. I'm sorry she had to find out that way. I'm sorry this is complicated, but I'm not sorry for kissing you, and I won't apologize for wanting you in my life. Gloria stepped between them, her small frame radiating protective fury. You need to leave. Now, Mrs. Rodriguez. Richard's voice carried none of his usual authority. I'd like to talk to you. About Maya. About what this means. I know what this means. Gloria's voice shook with controlled rage. This means my daughter becomes another cautionary tale about girls who reach too high. Richard looked past her to Maya, who stood frozen between her mother's fear and her own desperate hope. Can I come in? Please. The silence stretched until Maya made the choice that would change everything. Let him in, Mama. Have you ever wanted something your family feared would destroy you? How do you choose between love and safety? Share your experience below. As Richard stepped into their modest living room, his presence seemed to fill every corner. But instead of the intimidation Maya expected, he looked smaller somehow, stripped of the armor his office provided. When he sat on their second-hand couch, acceptance replacing judgment in his expression, Gloria's certainty began to waver. I know what this looks like, he said quietly, meeting Gloria's suspicious gaze. I know the history. I know why you're scared. Do you? Gloria's voice carried decades of accumulated pain. Do you know what happens to black women who get involved with powerful white men? Do you know how many of us get used up and thrown away? Richard was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped in front of him. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I know what my father did to women who worked for him. I know what men in my position have done for generations. And I know that Maya deserves better than to pay for their crimes. The admission hung in the air like a confession. And for the first time since walking into their apartment, Richard looked directly at Gloria. I'm asking you to let me prove that not all men who look like me are the same. Your daughter is the most brilliant person I've ever met, and I want to protect that, not exploit it. Maya held her breath as her mother studied Richard's face, looking for lies she had learned to recognize, searching for the manipulation that had destroyed her own dreams 20 years ago. Finally, Gloria nodded, a small, reluctant gesture that felt like the earth shifting beneath their feet. One chance, she said. You hurt her, and I will make you pay in ways your money can't fix. As Richard's relief flooded his expression, Maya's phone buzzed with a message that made her blood run cold. The text was from an unknown number. Enjoying your billionaire boy toy? Too bad everyone's about to know exactly what you're really after. Check tomorrow's headlines. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And someone was about to destroy everything they had carefully built. Maya's hand shook as she showed the message to Richard and Gloria. In that moment, as fear replaced hope in all their eyes, they realized the real battle hadn't even begun. He showed up at her door, not as a billionaire demanding compliance, but as a man asking for a chance to prove that power doesn't always corrupt. Sometimes it can protect. Their modest living room had never contained someone like Richard Lawson. His designer suit and polished shoes should have looked ridiculous against the thrift store furniture, but instead he looked smaller, more human, stripped of the armor his office provided. Gloria sat across from him like a judge weighing evidence, her eyes searching his face for the lies she had learned to recognize. Maya perched on the edge of the couch between them, caught between her mother's protective fear and Richard's desperate sincerity. "Tell me about your father," Gloria said suddenly, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who had survived too much to be fooled by smooth words. Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, Maya thought he wouldn't answer. Then his mask slipped completely, revealing wounds that money had never been able to heal. "He owned everything and everyone around him," Richard said quietly, "including the women who worked in our house. My mother knew, but she never said anything. She just looked the other way while he destroyed families for his own entertainment." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Maya had never heard Richard talk about his family, had never seen him vulnerable like this. "I was 12 when I realized what power really meant," he continued, his hands clenched in his lap. "It meant taking what you wanted and never paying the real cost. It meant the people who served you were just things to be used up and thrown away." Gloria's expression softened slightly. "And what does power mean to you now?" "It means responsibility." His eyes found Maya's, holding her gaze with quiet intensity. "It means using what you have to protect the people who matter. It means making sure no one gets hurt the way my father hurt others." Maya felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the cold corporate king she had first met. This was a man who had built walls around his heart to keep from becoming the monster his father had been. "You think you could protect her?" Gloria's voice carried decades of skepticism. "You think your money and influence can stop the world from tearing her apart for daring to reach above her station?" "I think Maya doesn't need my protection," Richard said, surprising them both. "She's strong enough to handle whatever comes. But I want to stand beside her when she does it. As an equal partner, not as a savior." The distinction mattered. Maya saw recognition flicker in her mother's eyes. The difference between a man who wanted to rescue her and one who wanted to support her strength. When someone from a different world wants to be part of yours, how do you test their sincerity? What would convince you? Share your thoughts below. "One mistake," Gloria said finally, her voice carrying the weight of a mother's love and fear. "One time you treat her like she's disposable, and I will make you remember why you should have been afraid of women like me." Richard nodded solemnly. "Understood." Maya's phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. "Sweet family meeting. Too bad it won't matter when everyone sees tomorrow's story. Hope you enjoyed playing house with your billionaire daddy." Maya's blood turned to ice. "They're watching us," she whispered, showing them the message. Richard's entire demeanor changed instantly. The vulnerable man disappeared, replaced by the corporate predator who had built an empire from nothing. "Pack a bag," he said to Maya. "Both of you. You're staying at my place until we figure out who's doing this." "We can't just," Gloria started. "They know where you live." Richard cut her off, his voice carrying absolute authority. "They know your routine. They've been planning this." He looked directly at Maya. "I won't let them hurt you to get to me." As they threw clothes into suitcases, Maya caught her reflection in the bedroom mirror. 24 hours ago, she had been a translator working late in a corporate office. Now she was the target of someone's calculated revenge, someone who wanted to destroy her relationship with Richard badly enough to stalk her family. The phone call came as they loaded into Richard's car, Gloria's voice urgent and terrified. "Maya, there are reporters outside Mrs. Johnson's apartment asking about you. They know about your job at the library. They know about your scholarship applications. Baby, they know things about you that only someone close could have told them. Maya's world tilted sideways. Someone had been collecting information about her life, her family, her dreams. Someone had been building a case against her while she fell in love. "Who?" she whispered into the phone. "I don't know, baby. But whoever it is, they've been watching you for a long time." As Richard's car pulled away from their apartment complex, Maya realized they weren't just running from bad publicity. They were running from someone who had been planning her destruction from the moment she first walked into that boardroom. The enemy wasn't just prejudice or fear. It was someone who knew them both well enough to know exactly where to strike to cause the most damage. Someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to destroy everything they were building together. They thought their biggest challenge was falling in love across impossible odds. They had no idea someone was building their destruction from the shadows. The Houston Chronicle's front page felt like a slap across Maya's face as she stared at it over breakfast in Richard's penthouse. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Tech billionaire's new product raises questions about corporate favoritism." But it was the photo that made her stomach drop. Her and Richard leaving his office building the night of their first kiss, his hand on her back in a gesture that looked possessive and inappropriate to anyone who didn't know the context. How did they get this? Maya's voice came out hollow. Richard's face was stone as he scanned the article. Professional photographer. Long lens. Someone paid good money for surveillance-quality images. The article painted their relationship in the worst possible light. The young black woman using her body to climb the corporate ladder. The wealthy white CEO taking advantage of his employee. Every fact was technically true, but twisted to seem sordid and calculating. Maya's phone had been buzzing nonstop since dawn. Text messages from classmates she hadn't spoken to in months, missed calls from reporters, voicemails from family friends who had seen the story and wanted to know if it was true. "I can't go to work today," Maya said quietly, the reality of her new situation sinking in. "I can't face those people." "You don't have to face anyone until we figure out who's behind this." Richard's voice carried deadly calm, but Maya could see the fury burning in his eyes. Someone had declared war on them, and he was ready to fight back. The second article appeared online before noon. From cleaning lady to corporate consultant. The meteoric rise of Maya Rodriguez. This one included details about their apartment, Gloria's work history, even Maya's high school grades. Someone had done extensive research into their private lives. "This is professional," Richard said, pacing his living room like a caged predator. "Someone with resources, connections, access to private information. This isn't random journalism. This is a coordinated attack." Maya sank deeper into his leather couch, feeling like she was drowning in a spotlight she never wanted. "Why would someone do this?" "Because you're a threat." His answer was immediate and certain. "You're brilliant, you're rising fast, and you're changing the dynamics in my company. Someone sees that as dangerous." The third attack came in the form of anonymous tips to financial regulators, suggesting Maya had inside information about merger deals. Suddenly, their professional relationship was under federal investigation for securities fraud. "This is insane," Maya whispered as Richard explained the investigation. "I never traded stocks. I don't even have a brokerage account." "Facts don't matter when someone wants to destroy you," Richard said grimly. "They just need to create enough smoke that people assume there's fire." Maya's phone rang, an unknown number she almost didn't answer. When she finally picked up, the voice on the other end made her blood freeze. "Enjoying your 15 minutes of fame?" The voice was digitally altered, robotic and cold. "You should have stayed in your lane, little girl. Now everyone gets to watch you fall." "Who is this?" Maya's voice shook despite her efforts to sound strong. "Someone who knows exactly what you are and what you're really after. Did you think nobody would notice the maid's daughter playing dress-up in the big leagues?" The line went dead, leaving Maya staring at her phone in horror. This wasn't just about bad publicity or business competition. This was personal, vindictive, designed to humiliate her in the most public way possible. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? How did you handle discovering their true nature? Tell your story in the comments. Richard found her curled up in his bedroom later that evening, laptop open to news articles that painted her as everything from a gold digger to a corporate spy. He sat beside her on the bed, closing the computer gently. "We're going to find out who's doing this," he said with quiet certainty. "And when we do, they're going to regret targeting you." What if they're right? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. What if I am just the maid's daughter who got too big for her britches? Richard's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You saved my company with your intelligence. You've improved every deal you've touched. You belong in that boardroom more than half the people who were born into it." Before she could respond, both their phones started ringing simultaneously. Gloria's number on Maya's screen, Richard's head of security on his. Maya answered first. "Mama." "Baby, you need to see the news. Channel 8. Right now." Maya grabbed the remote with trembling hands, Richard moving closer as the local news filled his bedroom television. The anchor's voice cut through them like a blade. "Tonight at 11, we have exclusive footage that raises serious questions about the relationship between Houston billionaire Richard Lawson and his 19-year-old employee Maya Rodriguez. What you're about to see was recorded inside Lawson Industries last month." The screen filled with security footage, grainy but unmistakable images of Maya and Richard in his office, their first kiss playing out in black and white for the entire city to witness. Maya's world collapsed in that moment. Someone hadn't just been watching them. Someone had been recording them. Someone with access to building security. Someone who knew exactly when and where to place cameras to capture their most intimate moments. "This is war," Richard said quietly, his voice carrying the promise of destruction for whoever had violated their privacy so completely. But as Maya watched their private moment being dissected on live television, she realized the battle had already been lost. Someone had stolen their love story and turned it into a scandal, and there was no way to put that particular demon back in the bottle. The phone call came at 3 a.m., Gloria's voice shaking with terror. "Maya, there are reporters camping outside our old apartment. Mrs. Johnson called. They're harassing the neighbors, asking questions about you and Mr. Lawson. Baby, they know things about our family that I never told anyone. Private things that only someone who's been watching us for months could know." As Maya's world crumbled around her, she realized the enemy wasn't just faceless media or public opinion. It was someone who had been building their case for destruction methodically, patiently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Someone who knew them well enough to know exactly where it would hurt the most. When the world turns against you, you discover who really stands beside you, and who is only pretending to support you while sharpening their knives. The conference room felt like a gladiator arena, as board members circled like predators, their expensive suits and cold stares all focused on the young black woman who had dared to rise above her station. But Maya sat straight back in her chair, chin raised, refusing to shrink under their collective judgment. "The federal investigation puts this company at risk," board member Harrison Webb announced, his voice carrying decades of entitlement. "We can't afford to be associated with potential securities fraud." "There is no securities fraud." Richard's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Maya has never traded a single stock. This is a manufactured crisis designed to remove her." "Designed by whom?" Webb's question dripped with fake concern. "Are you suggesting someone is targeting Ms. Rodriguez specifically?" Maya felt the trap closing around her. They were forcing Richard to choose between defending her and protecting his company. Every word he spoke in her defense would be used as evidence that he was compromised, that his judgment couldn't be trusted. "I'm suggesting," Richard said carefully, "that someone is using false allegations to manipulate this board into making a decision based on fear instead of facts." "The facts," Webb continued, "are that Ms. Rodriguez has been given unprecedented access to sensitive information despite having no formal qualifications. The facts are that she's been promoted faster than any employee in company history. The facts are that their personal relationship creates obvious conflicts of interest." Maya had heard enough. She stood slowly, drawing every eye in the room to her. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority she had earned, not inherited. "You want to know what I stole?" Maya's voice rang clear across the boardroom. "I stole your assumptions. I stole your comfort. I stole your ability to pretend that talent only comes wrapped in privilege. And if that threatens you, maybe the problem isn't what I took, it's what you never earned." The room fell silent. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, her words hitting closer to home than they wanted to admit. Furthermore, Maya continued, her confidence building with each word. "If you're concerned about qualifications, let's discuss them. I've identified flaws in every major contract I've reviewed. I've saved this company millions in potential losses. I've increased efficiency in international negotiations by 40%. What I haven't done is trade stocks, steal information, or compromise the integrity of this organization." Webb's face flushed red. "Your qualifications aren't the issue. My qualifications are the only issue that should matter in a business discussion." Maya's voice never wavered. "Unless you're suggesting that my competence is less important than your comfort level with who I am and where I came from." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Maya had just forced them to either admit their decision was based on merit or reveal their true motivations. When the whole world seems against you, what keeps you standing? What gives you the strength to fight back? Share your source of power below. Richard watched Maya defend herself with a mixture of pride and fury. She shouldn't have to prove her worth to people who couldn't match her intelligence on their best day. But she was doing it anyway, standing tall in a room full of people who wanted to see her fail. "The vote," Webb said stiffly, "is whether to suspend Ms. Rodriguez pending the outcome of the federal investigation." "Before you vote," Richard said, his voice deadly calm, "there's something you should know." He placed a thick file on the conference table with deliberate precision. "Maya wasn't the one stealing from this company, but I know exactly who was." The file hit the table with the sound of justice finally arriving. "Marcus Chun," Richard announced, his words falling like hammer blows, "has been embezzling funds from the community development budget for the past 18 months. The same Marcus Chun who's been feeding information to reporters about Maya's background. The same Marcus Chun who had access to building security footage." Webb's face went white. "That's impossible. Marcus is currently being arrested by federal agents," Richard finished, "along with his accomplice in the accounting department who helped him manipulate the books." Maya felt the room shift around her. The board members who had been ready to destroy her minutes ago now looked uncomfortable, embarrassed, caught in their own prejudice and manipulation. "The investigation into securities fraud," Richard continued, "will find that Marcus planted false evidence to implicate Maya while covering his own crimes. The media campaign against her was designed to discredit the one person smart enough to eventually notice the missing funds." As if on cue, Richard's phone buzzed. He answered on speaker so the entire room could hear his head of security. "Mr. Lawson, Marcus Chun has been taken into custody. The FBI found evidence of the embezzlement in his home office, along with contracts for private investigators to gather information on Ms. Rodriguez." Maya sank back in her chair, relief and vindication washing over her in equal measure. The past week of hell had been orchestrated by someone she had trusted, someone who had smiled at her in hallways while planning her destruction. "The vote," Richard said quietly, "is no longer necessary." But Maya wasn't finished. She stood again, her voice carrying newfound authority as she addressed the board members who had been ready to sacrifice her to protect their own comfort. "I want to be clear about something," she said, meeting each of their eyes. "I didn't ask for special treatment. I didn't ask to be protected from scrutiny. What I asked for was the chance to prove my worth through my work. Some of you were willing to deny me that chance based on assumptions about who I am and what I must want." Her words hit their targets with surgical precision. These powerful men, used to controlling narratives and outcomes, had been exposed as petty and prejudiced by a 19-year-old woman who refused to be intimidated. "Going forward," Maya continued, "I hope we can focus on what I contribute rather than where I came from. Because this company will either value competence over comfort, or it will continue to lose ground to competitors who don't care what their talent looks like." As the board filed out in subdued silence, Richard remained behind with Maya. She was shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, the full weight of what had just happened settling over her. "You were magnificent," he said quietly, pulling her into his arms. "I was terrified," she admitted against his chest. "You were brave. There's a difference." As they held each other in the empty boardroom, Maya realized something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer the girl who needed rescuing. She was the woman who had rescued herself and proven that some battles are worth fighting, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. But victory came with its own price. Outside, the world was still watching, still judging, still waiting for them to fail. The real test wasn't surviving the attack. It was building something strong enough to withstand whatever came next. Justice has a way of hiding in the shadows until the right moment to strike. And when it strikes, it doesn't just reveal the truth. It burns away everything false that came before. The boardroom transformed into a courtroom as Richard methodically presented evidence of Marcus's betrayal. Financial records, forged documents, recorded conversations, each piece falling into place like dominoes in a devastating cascade of justice. Maya watched in stunned silence as the man who had welcomed her to the company, who had complimented her intelligence, who had seemed genuinely supportive of her success, was revealed as the architect of her destruction. Marcus Chun has been systematically stealing from community development programs for 18 months. Richard's voice carried the cold precision of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. Programs specifically designed to help families like Maya's. While he smiled at her in hallways, he was stealing money that could have put dozens of kids through college. The irony was brutal and deliberate. Marcus hadn't just attacked Maya personally. He had been stealing from the very community she represented, making himself rich while keeping others poor. The timeline is clear, Richard continued, clicking through a presentation that must have taken his team all night to prepare. The first media leak about Maya occurred exactly 3 days after she discovered the accounting discrepancy in the Morrison deal. Marcus realized she was getting close to exposing him. Maya remembered that day clearly now. She had questioned some numbers that didn't add up, asked Marcus about budget allocations that seemed inflated. He had dismissed her concerns with a smile, told her not to worry about things above her pay grade. He had been counting on her inexperience, her willingness to defer to authority. He hadn't expected her to keep digging. The security footage was edited, Richard announced, causing several board members to shift uncomfortably. Marcus had administrative access to building cameras. He cherry-picked moments that looked inappropriate out of context while deleting footage that would have shown their interactions were professional. Maya felt sick thinking about how violated she had been. Marcus had been watching her private moments, recording her conversations, building a file of evidence to destroy her reputation whenever she became too much of a threat. The private investigators, Richard's voice dropped to dangerous quiet, were hired to find dirt on Maya's family. When they couldn't find any real scandals, Marcus instructed them to imply improper relationships, suggest gold-digging motivations, anything that would discredit her intelligence by making her seem calculating. The room was silent except for the sound of pages turning as board members reviewed the evidence. Maya could see the shame on their faces. They had been manipulated just as much as she had, their prejudices used against them by someone who understood exactly how to trigger their fears about young black women in positions of power. "Mr. Lawson," Webb's voice was subdued, barely audible. "We owe Ms. Rodriguez an apology." "You owe her more than that," Richard replied sharply. "You owe her the respect she earned but was denied. You owe her the recognition that she saved this company while one of your most trusted advisors was robbing it blind." Maya finally found her voice. "I don't want apologies," she said, surprising herself with how steady she sounded. "I want this to never happen again. I want the next brilliant young person who walks into this building to be judged on their merit, not their background." What does vindication feel like when you've been falsely accused? Have you ever been proven right when everyone doubted you? Share that victory moment below. The celebration happened in Richard's penthouse that evening. Just the two of them and the city lights spread below like a constellation of possibilities. Maya felt lighter than she had in weeks. The weight of suspicion and judgment finally lifted from her shoulders. "We survived," Richard said, pulling her against him as they stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Dallas. "We more than survived," Maya replied, her hands fisting in his shirt as desire replaced relief in her bloodstream. "We conquered," when his mouth claimed hers. It was with the desperate hunger of two people who had nearly lost everything and found themselves stronger than before. Maya pressed herself against him, needing to feel his heartbeat, his heat, the solid reality of their survival. He lifted her against the windows, her legs wrapping around his waist as the city glittered below them. This time, when they made love, it wasn't about crossing lines or exploring forbidden territory. It was about claiming each other after nearly losing everything, about celebrating not just their love, but their right to love freely. "I thought I was going to lose you," Richard murmured against her throat as they moved together, urgent and desperate and completely connected. "Never," Maya gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders as sensation overwhelmed thought. "You're stuck with me now." Afterward, as they lay tangled in his sheets with Dallas twinkling beyond the windows, Maya felt a peace she had never experienced before. The battle was over. The truth had won. They had survived the worst that prejudice and jealousy could throw at them. "There's something else," Richard said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "The community development funds that Marcus stole, we're going to recover every penny and triple the budget. Real programs, real change, real opportunities for kids who deserve them." Maya lifted her head to look at him, seeing the man who had fallen in love with her mind before her body, who had risked his empire to defend her worth. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. We're going to build something that matters, Maya. Something that makes sure other brilliant kids don't have to fight as hard as you did for the chance to prove themselves." As she settled back against his chest, Maya realized their love story was becoming something bigger than romance. It was becoming a foundation for change, a platform for justice, a partnership that could actually make the world better for the next generation of young people who dared to dream above their circumstances. But even in the glow of victory, she couldn't shake the memory of Marcus's cold smile as he was led away in handcuffs. His final words echoed in her mind like a curse. "You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming next." Some enemies retreat when defeated. Others regroup and plan their revenge. As Maya drifted toward sleep in Richard's arms, she couldn't help wondering which kind of enemy Marcus-chan would prove to be. The battle was won, but something told her the war was far from over. They survived the storm that was meant to destroy them. Now, they had to decide what to build from the ashes, together or apart. The new corporate structure looked different on paper, but in the executive conference room, the change was palpable. Maya's nameplate gleamed beside Richard's at the head of the table, two minds that had learned to think as one now officially recognized as equals. "The Jakarta expansion," Maya announced to the room full of executives who 6 months ago wouldn't have acknowledged her existence, "requires a complete restructuring of our approach to international partnerships." She clicked through her presentation with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was sitting. No longer the girl defending her right to be in the room. Now she was the woman leading the discussion. "Ms. Rodriguez is correct," Richard added, his voice carrying the warm pride of a partner rather than a protector. Her analysis of Indonesian corporate law identified issues our legal team missed completely. Maya felt the familiar thrill of intellectual recognition, but now it came with something deeper. The security of knowing her worth was no longer questioned, only celebrated. After Marcus's arrest and the exposure of his schemes, the board had unanimously voted to promote Maya to senior partner. The decision wasn't charity or damage control. It was acknowledgement of what she had always been, the smartest person in most rooms she entered. The Community Development Initiative, Maya continued, moving to her next slide, will launch in 3 phases. Phase 1 focuses on educational programs in underserved communities. Phase 2 creates mentorship opportunities between our executives and promising students. Phase 3 establishes scholarship funds for higher education. Webb, who had been ready to vote her out just weeks ago, nodded approvingly. The budget allocation for Phase 1. 15 million, recovered from Marcus's embezzlement, plus an additional 5 million commitment from the company, Maya replied smoothly. This isn't charity. It's investment in the next generation of talent that this industry desperately needs. She had learned to speak their language. Return on investment, long-term strategy, competitive advantage. But she was using that language to change the game entirely, making social justice sound like sound business practice. What would you do with power if you finally got it? How would you use success to help others who started where you started? Share your dreams below. The meeting ended with handshakes and genuine respect, a far cry from the whispered skepticism Maya had faced just months earlier. As the executives filed out, she remained behind with Richard, savoring the quiet triumph of belonging. "You were incredible in there," he said, moving behind her chair to massage the tension from her shoulders. "I was terrified," she admitted, leaning back against his chest. 6 months ago, I was translating documents. Now I'm running international expansion projects with budgets bigger than some country's GDP. And you're doing it better than people who've been in this business for decades." His hands moved lower, finding the knots of stress between her shoulder blades. "You know what I think?" "What?" The question came out breathier than she intended, as his touch worked magic on muscles she didn't realize were tight. "I think we should celebrate. Your office. 10 minutes. The suggestion sent heat spiraling through her belly. Their relationship had evolved far beyond the desperate need to prove they belonged together. Now it was the confident claiming of two people who knew exactly what they meant to each other. Maya's new office was a corner space with windows overlooking both downtown Dallas and the community center that would soon house their first educational programs. Richard had insisted on the symbolic placement. She could see both the world she had conquered and the world she was determined to change. When he appeared in her doorway 10 minutes later, loosening his tie with deliberate slowness, Maya felt desire pool low and hot in her belly. This wasn't about forbidden territory anymore. This was about celebration, about marking their shared success in the most intimate way possible. "Lock the door," she said simply, and watched his eyes darken with anticipation. Their lovemaking had evolved from desperate and secret to confident and claiming. Richard knew her body now, knew exactly how to make her gasp his name, knew the difference between the sound she made when she was losing control and when she was taking it. "My brilliant partner," he murmured against her throat as he pressed her against the windows overlooking their empire. "My equal in everything that matters." The words were as arousing as his touch. Recognition and desire intertwined in ways that made her feel powerful and feminine simultaneously. This was what partnership looked like, supporting each other's ambitions while celebrating their connection. As Dallas spread below them, like a promise of everything they could build together, Maya realized they had created something unprecedented. Not just a love story, but a business dynasty. Not just personal success, but a platform for systemic change. The phone call came during their post-celebration dinner at the penthouse. Gloria's voice urgent, but not panicked this time. "Maya, Channel 7 is running a story about the foundation launch. But baby, they're calling it from scandal to success. The redemption of Maya Rodriguez. It's actually positive." Maya grabbed the remote, Richard moving closer as the local news filled their living room. The anchor's tone was completely different from the attack pieces of months ago. "Tonight, we follow up on the Maya Rodriguez story with exclusive coverage of her remarkable rise from controversy to corporate leadership. The young woman who was once accused of improper relationships with her billionaire boss has proven her critics wrong by spearheading the largest community development initiative in Houston's history. The story featured interviews with community leaders, shots of construction beginning on the new educational center, testimonials from scholarship recipients who would benefit from programs Maya had designed. "She's changed the conversation entirely," the anchor concluded. From questions about her qualifications to recognition of her contributions. Maya Rodriguez has transformed not just her own story, but the opportunities available to the next generation. As the story ended, Maya felt a completion she hadn't expected. The girl who had been invisible was now impossible to ignore. The talent that had been questioned was now celebrated. The love that had been scandalous was now seen as partnership. But even in the glow of public vindication, Maya couldn't forget the lessons learned from their battle. Success made you a target. Power came with enemies. And someone was always watching, waiting for you to make a mistake they could exploit. The phone buzzed with an unknown number. Maya almost didn't answer, remembering the threatening calls from before. But curiosity won out. Maya, the voice was hesitant, unfamiliar. This is Detective Rodriguez with Houston PD. We need to talk to you about Marcus Chen. He's been making some claims from prison, and we think you should know what he's saying about your family. Maya's blood turned cold. Even behind bars, Marcus was still trying to destroy them. The war wasn't over after all. When you think your enemies are defeated, the most dangerous ones are still planning their revenge from the shadows, and they know exactly where you're most vulnerable. Detective Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of bad news through the phone speaker as Maya and Richard sat frozen in their penthouse dining room. Marcus Chun has been making allegations from his prison cell. Claims about your mother's immigration status. Maya says he has documentation that could change everything. Maya's fork clattered against her plate. What kind of documentation? He's alleging that Gloria Rodriguez entered the country illegally 23 years ago. Says he has paperwork proving she's been using false social security numbers, working under fake documentation. The detective paused. Ms. Rodriguez, if these allegations are true, it could mean deportation proceedings. The room spun around Maya. Her mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her daughter a chance at the American dream, was being targeted for the very courage that had brought them to this country. It's lies, Maya whispered, but uncertainty crept into her voice. There were parts of her mother's story that had never been fully explained, gaps in the timeline that Maya had never questioned because the truth had seemed too painful to examine. Richard's hand found hers across the table, steady and warm. Even if it's not lies, we'll handle it. There are legal protections, paths to citizenship. You don't understand, Maya interrupted, pulling her hand away. If Mama gets deported, I lose everything. Not just her, everything we've built, everything we've fought for. The foundation, the scholarship programs, my position at the company. It all becomes impossible to maintain if I'm fighting immigration battles. The detective continued, his voice grim. There's more. Chun is claiming he has evidence that your academic records were falsified, that your high school transcripts were altered to help you get into college. He's painting a picture of systematic fraud going back years. Maya felt nauseous. Marcus wasn't just attacking her present. He was trying to destroy her entire history, make everything she had accomplished seem built on lies and deception. None of this makes sense, Richard said, his corporate instincts kicking in. Marcus was embezzling money. Why would anyone believe allegations from a convicted criminal? Because, Detective Rodriguez replied, he's not making these accusations alone. He has a co-conspirator who's been feeding him information. Someone with access to immigration databases, school records, employment history. Someone who's been building this case for months while you thought you were safe. The second shoe dropped with devastating precision. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. Time to see what your precious mother has been hiding from you. Maya's laptop screen filled with scanned documents. Immigration papers, employment records, social security applications. All bearing her mother's name. All showing discrepancies that painted Gloria Rodriguez as someone who had been living under false pretenses for over 2 decades. But it was the final document that made Maya's world collapse completely. A marriage certificate from 24 years ago, showing Gloria Rodriguez married to Miguel Santos in El Paso, Texas. A marriage that had never been mentioned, never been explained, never been divorced. Maya stared at the certificate, her mind racing through the implications. If her mother had been married when Maya was born, if she had used that marriage to gain legal status, if there were legal complications that had never been resolved, Maya. Richard's voice seemed to come from very far away. Whatever this is, whatever these documents say, we'll figure it out. But Maya was remembering conversations now, fragments of her mother's carefully constructed stories that had never quite added up. The way Gloria had always been nervous around authority figures. The way she had always paid bills in cash, avoided official paperwork, kept their family invisible in ways that Maya had attributed to poverty but now realized might have been about something else entirely. "I need to talk to Mama," Maya said quietly. The confrontation happened in Richard's guest bedroom, where Gloria had been staying since the media attacks began. Maya spread the documents across the bed like evidence in a trial, watching her mother's face go through shock, fear, and finally resignation. "Is it true?" Maya asked simply. Gloria sank onto the edge of the bed, her small frame seeming to shrink even further. "Some of it. Not all of it, but some." The admission hit Maya like a physical blow. The woman who had raised her to value honesty above everything else had been living with secrets that could destroy them both. "Tell me," Maya said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "Tell me all of it." Gloria's story came out in broken pieces. A young woman fleeing domestic violence in Mexico, a marriage of convenience to gain legal status, a husband who had disappeared after taking her money, leaving her trapped between countries with no legal recourse. A social security card obtained under false pretenses because it was the only way to work legally, to provide for the baby she was carrying, to build the life in America that she had dreamed of. "I never meant for it to hurt you," Gloria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted to give you chances I never had." Maya felt her world restructuring around this new information. Everything she had built, every success she had achieved, was now tainted by the knowledge that it had been purchased with her mother's lies. What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most had been lying to protect you? How do you reconcile love with deception? Share your experience below. The media explosion was immediate and devastating. By morning, every news outlet in Texas was running stories about the illegal immigrant family that had scammed their way into corporate America. The narrative was ugly and predictable. The outsiders who had stolen opportunities from real Americans, the fraudulent success story built on deception and manipulation. Maya's phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comment, board members expressing concern, community leaders distancing themselves from the foundation. In 24 hours, she went from celebrated success story to cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting people who didn't belong. But it was the call from Webb that delivered the killing blow. "Maya, the board has voted. We're suspending your position pending investigation of these new allegations. The foundation programs are being put on hold until we can sort out the legal implications." "You're firing me," Maya said, her voice hollow. "We're protecting the company from potential legal liability if these immigration issues result in criminal charges." Maya hung up without letting him finish. In the space of 48 hours, Marcus had managed to destroy everything she had built from his prison cell, using her mother's desperation against both of them. Richard found her standing at the windows overlooking Dallas, watching the city that had once seemed full of promise now feel like a trap. "We're going to fight this," he said simply. "No," Maya replied, her voice carrying a finality that stopped him cold. "We're not." She turned to face him, and Richard saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. Not defeat, but decision. Not surrender, but strategy. "Marcus won this round because he's fighting dirty and we've been fighting fair. If he wants to destroy my family by digging up the past, then maybe it's time he learned that two can play that game." The smile that crossed Maya's face was sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus Chun thought he knew how to fight dirty. He was about to discover that the maid's daughter had learned a few tricks of her own. The real battle was just beginning. Sometimes the best defense is offense. And sometimes the people who underestimate you give you exactly the weapons you need to destroy them. Maya's transformation began in the law library at 3 a.m., surrounded by immigration statutes and citizenship laws while the rest of Dallas slept. But she wasn't researching her mother's case. She was researching Marcus Chen's. "What are you looking for?" Richard asked, setting coffee beside her laptop as dawn broke over the city. "Leverage," Maya replied without looking up from her screen. "Marcus thinks he's the only one who knows how to dig up dirt. But he forgot something important. I'm smarter than he is." The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Marcus's own prison records. While he was making accusations about Gloria's immigration status, Maya discovered that Marcus had been born in Hong Kong, not California, as his employment records claimed. His own citizenship had been obtained through his father's military service, but there were gaps in the documentation that looked suspiciously familiar. "He's projecting," Maya murmured, scrolling through naturalization records. "Every accusation he's making about Mama is something he's vulnerable to himself."
But the real discovery came when Maya cross-referenced Marcus's financial records with his family's immigration timeline. The dates didn't match. The money Marcus had been embezzling wasn't just going to his personal accounts. It was being sent overseas to family members who were living in the United States illegally. Maya leaned back in her chair, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking together. He's been funding an immigration fraud network, using stolen company money to pay for false documents, fake marriages, fraudulent citizenship applications. The same things he's accusing us of doing. Richard looked up from his own research. "Can you prove it?" "I can prove some of it, but I need help to prove all of it." Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard as she composed an email that would change everything. "I need someone who knows how to navigate immigration law, someone who understands how these networks operate, someone who has access to federal databases." The response came back within hours. Detective Maria Santos with Immigration and Customs Enforcement had been tracking the same financial patterns Maya had discovered. They weren't just looking at Marcus Chun anymore. They were looking at an entire network of immigration fraud that stretched from Texas to California to Hong Kong. "Your information filled in gaps we've been trying to close for months," Detective Santos explained during their meeting at the federal building. Chun wasn't just embezzling money. He was laundering it through fake immigration services, charging desperate families thousands of dollars for fraudulent documentation. Maya felt sick thinking about the families Marcus had exploited. People like her mother, desperate for legal status, willing to pay anything for a chance at the American dream. He had preyed on their vulnerability while positioning himself as a respectable businessman. "What about my mother?" Maya asked quietly. "Your mother's situation is complicated, but it's not criminal," Detective Santos replied. "She was a victim of domestic violence who used survival strategies that were illegal but understandable. Chun was a predator who exploited people's desperation for profit. The legal system recognizes the difference." The press conference happened 48 hours later, with Maya standing behind a federal prosecutor as the real story finally came to light. Marcus Chun wasn't just an embezzler. He was the architect of an immigration fraud network that had stolen millions from both corporations and vulnerable families. Mr. Chun used his position at Lawson Industries to identify potential targets, the prosecutor announced. He would research employees' backgrounds, particularly those from immigrant communities, and either recruit them into fraudulent schemes or use information about their status to blackmail them into silence. Maya watched the reporters' faces change as they realized the scope of Marcus's crimes. The man who had painted her as a fraudulent outsider was himself the real criminal, exploiting the very communities he claimed to be protecting. But Maya wasn't satisfied with federal justice. She wanted personal vindication. The civil lawsuit was filed that afternoon. Maya Rodriguez versus Marcus Chun and his co-conspirators, seeking damages for defamation, emotional distress, and conspiracy to destroy her reputation. But the real power move was the second lawsuit, the Gloria Rodriguez Foundation versus Chun Immigration Services, seeking to recover every penny that had been stolen from families seeking legitimate immigration help. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore," Maya explained to Richard as they reviewed the legal documents. "We're fighting for every family Marcus exploited, every person he scammed, every dream he destroyed for profit." The discovery process revealed the full scope of Marcus's operation. Bank records showing payments to corrupt officials, recordings of phone calls where Marcus coached clients on how to lie to immigration officers, documents proving that he had been selling false information to media outlets about other successful immigrants who might threaten his business model. Maya wasn't just another victim. She was the threat that could expose his entire operation. So he had tried to destroy her first. Have you ever turned the tables on someone who tried to destroy you? What did it feel like to fight back and win? Share your victory story below. The vindication came in waves. First, the federal indictment that added racketeering and conspiracy charges to Marcus's embezzlement conviction. Then the civil court judgment that awarded Maya damages not just for the harm to her reputation, but for the emotional trauma of watching her mother be targeted by someone who was committing far worse crimes. But the sweetest victory came from the immigration court decision that granted Gloria Rodriguez a path to legal citizenship based on her status as a victim of domestic violence and immigration fraud. The woman who had been threatened with deportation was now protected by the same legal system that Marcus had tried to use against her. "It's over," Richard said as they watched the news coverage of Marcus's sentencing, 12 years in federal prison for multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. "No," Maya replied, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. "Now it begins." The Lawson Industries board meeting that followed was unlike any in the company's history. Maya walked into the conference room not as a supplicant begging for her job back, but as someone who had proven her value in the most public way possible. "The board owes you an apology," Webb began, but Maya cut him off. "The board owes me nothing," she said simply. "You made a business decision based on incomplete information. I understand that. But now you have complete information, and you need to make another business decision." She placed a folder on the conference table with the same precision Richard had used months earlier when exposing Marcus's crimes. "This is my proposal for restructuring this company's approach to corporate responsibility, immigrant workforce integration, and community development. It's based on everything I learned during this fight about how real change happens." The proposal was revolutionary, not just charity programs, but systematic changes to hiring practices, advancement opportunities, and corporate culture that would make Lawson Industries a model for other companies. Maya wasn't asking to return her old position. She was demanding the power to transform the entire industry. "This is ambitious," Webb said, scanning the documents. "This is necessary," Maya replied. "You can either lead this change or watch your competitors leave you behind. But you can't continue operating the way you always have and expect different results." The vote was unanimous. Maya Rodriguez was promoted to Executive Vice President of Strategic Development, with full authority to implement the changes she had outlined. As the board members filed out, offering congratulations and genuine respect, Maya remained seated at the table where she had once been told she didn't belong. Richard approached slowly, understanding that something fundamental had changed not just in Maya's position, but in Maya herself. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. Maya looked out the windows at the Dallas skyline, seeing not just buildings and opportunities, but communities and possibilities she now had the power to impact. "It feels like responsibility," she said simply. "The real work starts now." Victory tastes different when you've earned it through battle rather than been given it through privilege. It tastes like responsibility, justice, and the weight of dreams that others are counting on you to achieve. The new office occupied the entire 51st floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Dallas and a conference table large enough for the expanded team Maya had assembled. But the real power wasn't in the space. It was in the stack of signed contracts representing partnerships with community organizations, universities, and advocacy groups across Texas. "The pilot program results exceed every projection," Maya announced to the board, clicking through slides that showed metrics they had never tracked before: employee retention rates by demographic, community economic impact, long-term educational outcomes for scholarship recipients. "We're not just improving our corporate image. We're improving our actual performance." Webb, who had once questioned her qualifications, now took notes on every recommendation. The expansion to other states, already in progress. 6 companies have requested consulting on implementing similar programs. "We're not just changing Lawson Industries, we're changing industry standards." Maya had learned to translate social justice into business language so fluently that board members forgot they were approving radical changes to corporate structure. She made equity sound like efficiency, diversity look like competitive advantage, community investment feel like smart strategy. But the real transformation was visible every day in the hallways. The executive floors no longer looked like exclusive country clubs. They looked like America, with faces and voices that reflected the communities the company actually served. Ms. Rodriguez, one of the new hires, approached after the meeting, her voice nervous but determined. I wanted to thank you for the mentorship program. A year ago, I was cleaning offices downtown. Today, I'm presenting marketing strategies to Fortune 500 clients. Maya recognized herself in the young woman's face. The same mixture of ambition and uncertainty, talent and fear, brilliance barely contained by circumstances that had been designed to limit it. You earned it, Maya replied simply. I just made sure you got the chance to prove what you could do. The conversation that changed everything happened during one of their late-night planning sessions, with Richard reviewing financial projections while Maya designed the next phase of community partnerships. The easy intimacy of their working relationship had evolved into something deeper. Two minds that complemented each other, two hearts that had survived every test. There's something I need to tell you, Richard said, closing his laptop and giving her his full attention. Maya looked up from her notes, recognizing the tone that meant serious conversation. What? I've been offered a position with the Department of Commerce. Federal appointment, reporting directly to the secretary. They want me to head up a new initiative on economic development in underserved communities. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. Richard in Washington meant Richard leaving Dallas, leaving the company, leaving the life they had built together. That's incredible, she managed to say, and meant it despite the pain beginning to bloom in her chest. You'd be perfect for something like that. I'd be perfect for it if I had a partner who understood the work as well as I do, Richard said quietly. Someone who's actually lived in the communities we'd be trying to help. Someone who knows how to translate policy into real change. Maya's breath caught as she understood what he was asking. Not just asking, offering. A partnership that would take them from corporate success to national influence, from changing one company to changing government policy. Maya, Richard's voice dropped to the intimate register that still made her pulse skip. I want you to come with me, as my partner in every way that matters. The proposal, both professional and personal, hung between them like a bridge to a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. Maya Rodriguez, who had started as the Maid's daughter, being offered the chance to shape federal policy on economic justice. When someone offers you the chance to change the world, how do you decide if you're ready for that much responsibility? What would you do? Tell me in the comments below. I need to think about it, Maya said, though her heart was already racing with possibilities. Of course. But Maya, Richard reached across the table to take her hand. This isn't just about the job. This is about us. About building something together that's bigger than either of us could create alone. The federal background check took 3 weeks and revealed nothing that Maya hadn't already survived. The hearings were pro forma. Her qualifications were undeniable, her story was public record, and her track record spoke for itself. Maya Rodriguez was confirmed as Deputy Director of Community Economic Development with a unanimous Senate vote. The farewell celebration at Lawson Industries felt like a graduation and a wedding combined. The employees Maya had mentored, the program she had created, the changes she had institutionalized, all of it would continue, but under new leadership she had personally trained. You're not leaving us, Webb said during his farewell speech. You're expanding our reach. Every policy you influence in Washington will create opportunities for communities across the country. Maya looked out at the faces in the room. People who had gone from skeptical to supportive to genuinely proud of what they had all built together. The girl who had once been told she didn't belong was now being celebrated for outgrowing the space entirely. But the most meaningful conversation happened with Gloria, who had been watching her daughter's transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement. Mija, Gloria said as they packed the last boxes from Maya's office. When I brought you to this building for the first time, I never imagined this. Imagine what, Mama? That you would own it. Not just work in it, not just survive in it, but actually change what it meant to everyone who came after you. Maya hugged her mother, understanding for the first time that Gloria's sacrifices hadn't just been about providing opportunities. They had been about changing the definition of what was possible for their family, their community, their future. The swearing-in ceremony in Washington was intimate by federal standards. Just family, close friends, and the team Maya would be leading. But as she raised her right hand and pledged to serve the American people, Maya felt the weight of every person who had made her success possible. Richard stood beside her afterward, no longer her boss or her mentor, but her equal partner in every sense that mattered. "Ready to change the world?" he asked quietly. Maya looked out at the crowd of faces, Gloria beaming with pride, colleagues who had become family, community leaders who had traveled from Texas to witness this moment, and realized she was no longer the girl who had stumbled into a boardroom and accidentally saved a billionaire's empire. She was the woman who had earned the right to sit at the most important tables in America, who had transformed every organization she had joined, who was now being trusted with the power to shape policies that would affect millions of lives. "Let's get to work," she replied, and meant every word. The biggest mistake people make about Washington is thinking it's about politics. It's actually about power, who has it, how they use it, and what they're willing to sacrifice to keep it. The Department of Commerce building hummed with the energy of decisions that moved markets and shaped economies. But Maya's first day felt like walking into another trap designed by people who expected her to fail. The meetings were in rooms where she was the only woman, the only person under 40, and definitely the only person who had ever cleaned office buildings for money. "The Midwest Manufacturing Initiative," Director Harrison announced, sliding a thick file across the mahogany conference table that looked suspiciously similar to every other conference table Maya had conquered. "We need someone to oversee community impact assessments." Maya scanned the proposal, recognizing immediately that it was designed to fail. The timelines were impossible, the budget was insufficient, and the community engagement strategies were outdated by decades. They were giving her the project no one else wanted, expecting her to take the blame when it collapsed. "I'll take it," she said simply, watching surprise flicker across their faces. But Maya wasn't planning to implement their doomed strategy. She was planning to completely redesign it using everything she had learned about turning impossible odds into inevitable success. The real work began after hours, in her temporary apartment, with Richard reviewing federal regulations, while Maya built coalitions with community leaders, union representatives, and local politicians who understood what real economic development looked like from the ground up. "You're not just fixing their broken project," Richard observed as Maya's contacts list grew to include mayors, community organizers, and business leaders from Detroit to Cleveland. "You're building a completely different model." "I'm building something that actually works," Maya replied, typing responses to emails from people who had never been consulted on federal economic policy, but who lived with the consequences every day. "Something that treats communities as partners, not obstacles." The transformation was swift and undeniable. Within 60 days, Maya had converted the failing manufacturing initiative into a comprehensive economic development program that attracted additional funding from 3 other federal agencies, partnerships with major corporations, and endorsement from community leaders who had previously boycotted government development programs. Director Harrison's morning briefing became a showcase for Maya's results rather than a forum for explaining her failures. Manufacturing jobs were being created ahead of schedule. Local businesses were reporting increased revenue, and the pilot communities were requesting expansion of the programs rather than complaining about federal interference. "How did you do this?" Harrison asked during one of their private meetings, genuine curiosity replacing his initial skepticism.
"I listened to people who actually live in these communities," Maya replied. "I asked them what they needed instead of telling them what we thought they should want. The concept was revolutionary in Washington, actually consulting the people affected by federal policy before implementing programs that would shape their economic future. But success in Washington came with its own dangers. The higher Maya climbed, the more enemies she made among people who preferred the old system of federal programs that sounded good in press releases but changed nothing on the ground. The attack came through the Washington Post, in an editorial disguised as investigative journalism, rising star, or federal overreach. Questions about Maya Rodriguez's rapid ascent. The article rehashed every accusation Marcus had made, questioned whether Maya's programs represented dangerous expansion of federal power, and suggested that her appointment had been motivated more by politics than qualifications. Maya read the piece during her morning coffee, recognizing the same patterns Marcus had used. Technically accurate information presented in the worst possible light, designed to make her success seem suspicious rather than earned. It's coordinated, Richard said, scanning social media responses to the article. Someone is pushing this story through multiple channels, amplifying criticism, trying to create enough noise to undermine your position. Who? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The investigative work that followed revealed a familiar pattern of wealthy interests threatened by Maya's success. Defense contractors worried about communities that no longer needed military installations to survive. Consulting firms losing federal contracts to programs that worked directly with local organizations. Politicians whose careers depended on keeping economic development programs ineffective enough to justify their continued existence. Maya had committed the ultimate Washington sin. She had made powerful people unnecessary by actually solving the problems they profited from maintaining. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a Senate committee room designed to intimidate witnesses into submission. Maya walked in wearing her mother's pearls and her father's determination, carrying a briefing book filled with metrics that would either vindicate her approach or end her career. Ms. Rodriguez, Senator Williams began, his voice carrying the condescension of someone who had never had his intelligence questioned by people who couldn't match his credentials. These aggressive programs you've implemented, some would say they represent federal overreach into areas traditionally handled by state and local governments. Maya had prepared for this exact question. Senator, respectfully, these programs exist because state and local governments requested federal partnership. We're not imposing solutions. We're providing resources to communities that have identified their own priorities. But the speed of implementation, the scope of changes, it's unprecedented. The problems we're addressing are unprecedented, Maya replied, her voice carrying the authority she had earned through results rather than inheritance. 40 years of economic policies that concentrated wealth in urban centers while abandoning rural and inner-city communities. We can either continue managing decline or start building solutions. The questioning continued for 3 hours, with senators attempting to find flaws in programs that were producing measurable improvements in employment, education, and community economic health. Maya answered every challenge with data, defended every decision with evidence, and refused to apologize for succeeding where previous administrations had failed. What would you do if you were questioned by people who had failed at the very things you were succeeding at? How do you stay confident when powerful people want you to fail? Share your experience below. The vindication came through an unexpected source, a bipartisan group of senators who had visited Maya's pilot communities and seen the results firsthand. They didn't just defend her programs, they demanded expansion to their own states. Ms. Rodriguez has achieved in 6 months what this department failed to accomplish in 6 years, Senator Martinez announced during the hearing's final session. Rather than questioning her methods, we should be asking why previous approaches were so consistently unsuccessful. As Maya left the hearing room, she realized she had crossed another threshold. The girl who had once been told she didn't belong in corporate boardrooms was now being asked to redesign federal economic policy. The woman who had survived every attempt to destroy her was now being trusted to rebuild the systems that determined opportunity for millions of Americans. But the real victory came in a phone call from Gloria that evening. Mija, Mrs. Johnson's nephew, got one of those manufacturing jobs in Detroit. First steady work he's had in 3 years. He said to tell you thank you for remembering people like him. Maya sat in her Washington apartment, looking out at monuments dedicated to men who had shaped American history, and realized she was no longer just changing her own story. She was changing the American story itself, making it include voices and dreams that had been excluded for too long. The work was far from over, but for the first time in her life, Maya felt like she had enough power to actually finish what she had started. Some stories end with happily ever after. The best stories end with, and then the real work began. The Rose Garden ceremony was smaller than Maya had imagined. Just family, key staff, and the community leaders whose lives have been transformed by the program she had spent 2 years building from impossible dreams into federal policy. President Carter approached the podium with the signed legislation that would make Maya's pilot programs permanent, expanding them to every state in the union. The Community Partnership Act represents the kind of innovative thinking we need to address complex economic challenges, the president announced to the gathered crowd. It proves that when we listen to communities rather than lecture to them, when we treat economic development as partnership rather than charity, we can achieve results that benefit everyone. Maya stood beside Richard as the president signed the bill into law, feeling the weight of transformation that had started in a Dallas boardroom and now reached every corner of the country. The girl who had once translated documents was now watching her ideas become the foundation of American economic policy. But the ceremony was just the beginning. The real celebration happened that evening in Maya's apartment, surrounded by the people who had made her success possible. Gloria, who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's opportunities. Richard, who had seen her potential before she believed in it herself. Colleagues who had become family through shared battles and shared victories. To Maya, Richard raised his glass in a toast, who proved that the best way to change the system is to become excellent enough that they have no choice but to let you in, then use that position to hold the door open for everyone else. The toast was interrupted by Maya's phone. A call from Detroit, where the first major manufacturing plant funded through her programs was beginning operations ahead of schedule. 600 jobs created in a community that had been written off by previous generations of policymakers. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Patricia Williams, plant manager at Detroit Precision Manufacturing. I wanted you to know, today we hired our 600th employee. Single mother, 2 kids, been out of work for 8 months. When she got the job, she cried right there in the interview room. Maya felt tears in her own eyes as the impact of policy became personal, individual, real. What's her name? Jennifer Santos. She said to tell you that you don't know her, but you save her family anyway. After the call ended, Maya stood at her window overlooking the Washington Monument, thinking about Jennifer Santos and the thousands of other families whose lives were being transformed by programs that treated economic development as human development. You did it, Richard said quietly, moving beside her to wrap his arms around her waist. We did it, Maya corrected, leaning back against his chest. All of us. But even in the glow of legislative victory, Maya knew this was just the foundation. Real change took generations, required constant vigilance, demanded leaders who understood that power was responsibility rather than privilege. The proposal Richard had been developing in secret was presented the next morning over breakfast. Not marriage, though that conversation was happening too, but something even more ambitious. The Roosevelt Institute wants us to develop a think tank focused on economic justice, Richard explained, sliding a folder across their kitchen table. Private funding, academic partnerships, direct pipeline to policy development. A place where the next generation of leaders can develop the kind of innovative approaches you've pioneered. Maya scanned the documents, recognizing the opportunity to institutionalize everything she had learned about turning outsider perspectives into insider influence. Who would run it? You would direct policy development. I would handle administration and funding. We'd recruit the smartest people we could find from communities that have been excluded from traditional policy development. The vision was revolutionary. A think tank that looked like America, staffed by people who understood economic challenges through lived experience rather than academic theory. A place where the next Maya Rodriguez could develop the tools and connections needed to change systems from within. There's one condition, Maya said, already knowing she would accept but wanting to establish the terms clearly. What's that? We do this right. Not as charity, not as tokenism, not as feel-good publicity. We build something that actually produces leaders who can change policy, win elections, and transform institutions. We build something that lasts beyond us. Richard's smile told her he had expected nothing less. Deal. The announcement of the Maya Rodriguez Institute for Economic Justice made headlines not because it was unusual for successful people to start think tanks, but because it was unprecedented for someone so young to be trusted with that level of institutional development. The criticism came immediately, predictably, from people who had spent careers managing rather than solving economic problems. Maya was too inexperienced, too idealistic, too focused on communities that didn't matter to national economic policy. But the applications that flooded in told a different story. Brilliant minds from community colleges and state universities, policy ideas from people who had lived with failed federal programs, innovative approaches from community leaders who had been creating solutions without federal resources for decades. Maya's first hire was Jennifer Santos from Detroit. The single mother who had gotten that manufacturing job was also a master's degree graduate in public policy who had been unemployed because her resume didn't include the right internships or family connections. "I want to build the programs I wish had existed when my family needed them," Jennifer explained during her interview. Maya recognized herself in Jennifer's combination of academic excellence and personal experience, talent and determination shaped by necessity rather than privilege. Then let's build them together. The work was harder than anything Maya had done before, but also more fulfilling. Instead of navigating existing bureaucracies, she was creating new institutions. Instead of proving she belonged in rooms where she wasn't wanted, she was building rooms where the next generation of leaders would always belong. The first policy paper produced by the Institute, Community-Centered Economic Development, Lessons from Federal Success Stories, became required reading in graduate programs across the country. The second paper, on using federal resources to support rather than replace local innovation, was cited in congressional hearings. The third paper, co-authored by Maya and Jennifer, was implemented as pilot policy in 6 states. But the real success was measured in individuals rather than institutions. The young woman from El Paso who used Institute research to win a seat in the Texas legislature. The community organizer from Cleveland who became the first in his family to earn a doctoral degree through the Institute's partnership programs. The policy analyst from Birmingham who developed the transportation initiatives that connected rural communities to urban job centers. Maya had created something that hadn't existed when she needed it. A pipeline for talent that looked like America, a development program for leaders who understood policy through personal experience, an institution that treated diversity as intellectual advantage rather than charitable obligation. The wedding happened on a Saturday in October, in the community center where Maya's first scholarship recipients had attended classes. Gloria walked her daughter down the aisle past faces that represented every phase of Maya's journey. Board members who had once questioned her qualifications, community leaders who had watched her transform federal policy, young people who saw in her marriage proof that love could transcend every barrier society tried to build. Richard waited at the altar not as the billionaire who had rescued the maid's daughter, but as the man had been transformed by loving someone whose mind challenged him to be better than he ever thought possible. "You two changed each other," the minister observed during the ceremony. "But more importantly, you changed the world around you." That's what real partnership looks like. As Maya and Richard exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to use their combined power to continue opening doors for others, the assembled crowd understood they were witnessing something more than a wedding. They were witnessing the foundation ceremony for a partnership that would shape American policy for decades to come. The reception was interrupted by a phone call that would define their honeymoon. The president's chief of staff asking if Maya would consider serving as the youngest Secretary of Commerce in American history. "The manufacturing programs are working beyond projections," the chief of staff explained. "The community development initiatives are being requested by governors from both parties. The president wants to expand your approach to all federal economic policy." Maya looked at Richard, who nodded encouragement, then at Gloria, who was crying with pride, then at the room full of people whose lives had been changed by her refusal to accept that brilliance was limited by background. "I'll consider it," Maya said, under one condition. What's that? I get to bring my team. The people who built these programs with me, the community leaders who made them work, the policy analysts who understand these issues through lived experience. If I'm going to run the Department of Commerce, it's going to look like the communities we're supposed to be serving. The answer was immediate and enthusiastic. Done. As Maya hung up the phone, Richard pulled her onto the dance floor of the community center where her journey had begun, surrounded by people who had watched her transform from invisible to undeniable, from outsider to architect of change. Ready to run the federal government? He asked, spinning her around the dance floor where she had once attended citizenship classes with her mother. Ready to transform it, Maya replied, and meant every word. The story could end here, with the maid's daughter dancing with the billionaire at their wedding reception while accepting a call that would make her one of the most powerful people in America. But the real story was just beginning, because Maya Rodriguez, now Maya Rodriguez Lawson, had learned that personal success was meaningless unless it created opportunities for the next generation of brilliant minds trapped by circumstances they hadn't chosen. The last scene was captured by a photographer for the Washington Post, but told a story bigger than any newspaper could contain. Maya and Richard, still in their wedding clothes, sitting on the floor of their hotel suite with laptops open, designing the recruitment strategy for a Department of Commerce that would finally look like America. In the background, ignored in favor of more important work, sat congratulatory flowers from senators, governors, and corporate leaders who had once refused to take her seriously. On the screen in front of them was an email from Jennifer Santos, now Dr. Jennifer Santos, sending her application to serve as Maya's deputy secretary. Subject line, ready to change everything. Maya smiled as she typed her response. Let's get to work, because some love stories are really about changing the world. And some people fall in love not just with each other, but with the possibility of using their combined power to make sure no one else has to fight as hard as they did for the right to be brilliant. The contract that had started everything, the merger documents that brought Maya into Richard's world, sat framed on their hotel room wall. Not as a memento of corporate success, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important documents are the ones that change not just businesses, but the fundamental definition of who gets to have power in America. Maya Rodriguez had started as the maid's daughter who could read contracts. She was ending as the woman who would rewrite the contract between the American government and the American people. And that was just the beginning. The end. Thank you for following Maya's journey from invisible to undeniable. In the comments below, share your own story of overcoming impossible odds, changing systems from within, or using success to create opportunities for others. Your story matters, and Maya's legacy lives in every person who refuses to accept that brilliance has boundaries.